working with Matt and Trey, but it was a lot of work to get done. So that game kind of went through a lot of different phases of this kind of content and that kind of content, but there really was like a lot of work to get done. Trey was actually pretty busy that time. At one point during 2013, Matt Stone took over kind of as the executive producer, and Chris Parker, one of the founders of Obsidian, he also sort of took more over, also kind of as our executive producer. And so Matt and Chris actually talked a lot, I'm not gonna say like every day, but pretty frequently about how to get that game done and what we needed to do.
So the release of South Park was really exciting. We knew before it came out that it really met the expectations that South Park had for the game and that we had for the game, which was it was going to be a role-playing game. It had to be fun. It also had to be funny, and it really had to be steeped in the IP. It had to represent the show perfectly. And we had accomplished all that, and we knew that. And when South Park was releasing, I think that development team, who at certain points in development had been very, very low, was hugely excited about the project, and our morale was great.
I mean, that's always the case. Look, man, like at the end of every project, it's hard because, especially for RPGs, the stuff doesn't come together. Like everybody thinks that like game dev is some experience where everything is great throughout and it's just like this level even experience and everybody's having a good time and you know, how could you not? But I'll tell you, it goes in waves. Like there are times when you're working on a project and it just feels like it's in the dumps and like the project will never be good and nothing you're doing is working and you're trying your hardest and it's just not coming together. And then there are other times when you're like riding a high where, you know, something just clicked in the game and now like a new system is in and it feels really good, or a new piece of content is in, or who knows, even something like the VO for an area got put in and all of a sudden it just feels good and everybody's kind of like, man, I guess we got something here. It feels pretty good. Like this is starting to come together. And you know, it's one of those things that you get re-energized at the end of a project, even though it can beat you down kind of throughout the whole process. When it comes out and when people actually love the game, it kind of makes it worth it. I know that sounds a little cliche or whatever, but it really does. Like you go through all of this pain and then all of a sudden you see people really enjoy your game and you just feel good. And it's like, okay, let's get on to the next one. Let's figure out the next thing to do. Like, what do we want to do now?
After we had finished South Park, there were a handful of people at the studio who felt that making a smaller game, a smaller budget game, something that was released on mobile, might be an interesting direction for the studio. It wasn't something that we had done before, but we are not sort of, you know, overly risk averse. Like, we like making games. It was pitched entirely as a small person project that wouldn't be too hard to do because it wasn't overly complicated, and we would put it up on mobile, and then, I don't know, everybody's gonna love it, and it's gonna be super easy to do, and it's no problem. Like everything in video games, that was insanely naive. The game is so much more complex than we really gave it credit for. We really investigated. You know, we just didn't do proper due diligence on the complexity of the game.
During and after we worked on the Pathfinder adventure card game, I think we learned a lot about ourselves as a studio, and there were two main things that came from that. The first was, we probably don't want to make mobile games again. We're just not a mobile game studio. We go make big games with big stories and characters. And not that you can't do that on mobile, it's just a different medium for that. We also tried to have the game be this semi-free-to-play type game. Again, you need lots of people looking at metrics, and as a studio, that just wasn't the right direction for us. It's a great game, so I would always say that it's a great game. I enjoy playing it, but as a studio, we need to just do what we normally do.
In our efforts to create something quick, we did not, and we made something that took a lot longer than we thought. With most games, there are lots of things that you can learn. In this case, really it's just, nothing is easy. You really have to think about your problems and make sure that you understand them up front. And just make sure that you plan appropriately. And I think Pathfinder Adventures helped teach us that those principles can't be ignored.
And I think the second thing that we learned is and we learned this well, I think, which is, while we're working on big things, we have to be careful if we're working on anything small. So we had a small team of people that were super passionate, but weren't as senior as some of our other people working on projects. And so they were doing fine, but we were distracted by the big things that we're working on. And we didn't pay a lot of attention to them. And not that they weren't great people, but I think that they went off in directions and developed that game in such a way that was actually hard to add content to it. And we ended up spending a lot more money on the game than we wanted to. And I think that learning from us actually, I think, really helped us when it came to kind of doing some of the future small things we did, like Grounded and Pentiment. Have people in charge who really have done it before, have a very, very specific vision, understand what they're trying to accomplish. And so, yeah, so I think if we had entered that with the card game, entered with a little bit more of that understanding of ourselves, I think the game would have been more successful, or maybe we wouldn't have done it. I'm not sure. But in the end, I'm still happy about the product, but we did have to learn things from it.
So Fergus comes and he says, hey, I got this really interesting request for proposal from mail.ru, which is this Russian company that primarily does like communication software, but is also broken into games. But they're having a hard time getting into the Western market. And so they want to do something that's cool. And so their proposal is to do a World of Tanks clone.
So we had a lot of discussion early on with Armored Warfare about whether we should even pursue the project. You know, some people felt because it was so outside of our wheelhouse that, you know, that maybe we shouldn't go there.
So at this time, and this is 2012, World of Tanks I think is still huge, but was like insanely huge back then. And they were like, well, if we can just capture like 20% of their market share, we'll be successful and it'll be great. And so we were like, well, does this really fit our wheelhouse? It's an online, multiplayer combat simulation. It has tons of like numbers and systems and stuff, and a lot of like player evolution stuff, and all of that stuff. Like, we can totally nail that. We know that we understand that. We understand how those kinds of numbers and progression systems work. But like, is really like an online tank combat sim like our thing? But we went and basically put together some demos using, I think, like just like off the market assets, and put together something, and it was actually fun. We were playing these little 2-on-2 4-person multiplayer games within like 2 weeks of trying to build something. And we paired that up with a proposal, and it turned into Armored Warfare.
I came from a background, prior to Obsidian, where, I built all kinds of different games, from RPGs obviously, but also like, simulations and action games and different, adventure games and stuff. So I wasn't as married to this idea that we should only ever do RPGs. So it didn't really bother me so much to take on a project like that.
Armored Warfare shares a lot of similarities to Grounded, in that we made it because we had a team of people who were excited to make it. Rich loved World of Tanks. So in a time of need, when we need to sign a project, he thought he could make a really cool World of Tanks type game. And so we made it. In the same way that Adam thought he could do a really good survival game. So we made it. And I think Armored Warfare was a ton of fun. It was a weird project for us, but it didn't feel so weird that I didn't understand why Obsidian wasn't doing it.
I think one of the things that was really fun about developing Armored Warfare was the involvement of the entire company playing the game every day. We'd have daily playtests, and it was just a lot of fun. We'd all get in the game in the afternoon and just be shooting each other up and yelling at each other. And I thought, it was a great experience to do that. It was definitely different for us, different development all around, different kind of publisher to work with, different type of game to make. But I thought it was really cool.
The only real strange things about it was obviously we were just working with a Russian publisher, and just Russian developers and publishers work different. And so we had to get used to that. At the end of the day, though, I really don't think it was that bad of a project. And it was still to this day the largest team we've ever had.
During the spring and summer of 2012, it was tough at the studio, right? And I mean, we had canceled projects, we're trying to sign other things, we have ideas, and we know we can do things well, right? And for me personally, it was this kind of period of time where it was walking into the studio, and I'm sure people saw this from time to time. I would come out of the stairwell with a completely like face just down and everything, and I literally would make a point of I'd remember I'd walk out of the stairwell and plaster a smile on my face. And I would do that when I'd walk out of my office, force myself to give this, I guess, an impression, because I didn't think we were done. But you know, a lot of people felt that way. I'm sure there was a part of me that felt that way. So it was hard, and it was a lot of like, are we, again, going back to that of like, are we going to make it? And that's for doing that for months is difficult. And so once we did the Kickstarter, and for that month of the Kickstarter, the morale at the studio just changed drastically. It's like, again, like me, they felt that now we can do something.
When we did the Kickstarter campaign for Pillars of Eternity, it was a real game changer for the studio. There was a big momentum shift for the people here and just kind of morale at the studio, right? Things had been kind of low since Stormlands. The summer, we had done all these proposals. We had signed this tank game, and people were like, is tank game really the right thing we should be doing? But going out and doing this Kickstarter was clearly, you know, getting back to our roots, a very role-playing centric sort of game, lots of numbers, you know, isometrics, had an old school, like the Baldur's Gates and the Icewind Dales that at least a lot of us had worked on back at Black Isle Studios.
The Pillars of Eternity Kickstarter was pretty wild, and just getting it going itself was a big challenge. Only one or two other games had big, significant Kickstarters that were successful. So it took a lot of convincing and, let's say, ultimatums with the owners to get the actual Kickstarter going. And then once we started working on it, I wasn't the one working on it initially. Adam Brennicky was doing a lot of the work on it.
So we were kind of in a churn of making pitches to publishers, and we weren't really seeing any progress. And a lot of the projects that we were pitching weren't super interesting. And so we were kind of just doing it to do it. And it was one of those things that you just see the opportunity and you think that we don't want to miss that. And we saw the success from Double Fine, we saw the success from In Exile, and I knew that we could kill it. So I was like, we need to do this. Let's do it. And I think that, you know, as the weeks went by and we were not really doing anything, and we're just kind of spinning our wheels trying to get another project, we had a good discussion, Josh and myself, and we said like, yeah, let's push the founders to get this done, and let's see what we can do with the Kickstarter.
When we started to get ready to actually launch the campaign, we kind of buckled down, but I still think that the majority of people at the studio had a very modest expectation for how well it was going to do. We really did think that at best we were going to fund it at the end of the 30-day campaign.
Before we launched the Project Eternity Kickstarter, we of course looked at everybody else's Kickstarter, and we're trying to figure out what's the secret sauce, like how do you make them successful. And so we'd worked on a lot of different stuff, like what was our webpage going to look like, what were our stretch goals going to be, what were our different tiers of pledges. We put a video together, we had to put art together, all this other kind of stuff, and we were really like into it, and of course hopeful, but you kind of don't know how it's all going to be until you press the button and launch it.
I knew that we had something really good, and we definitely put our best effort behind it. So I knew that I had a good feeling about it, but you never know. I thought that it would be successful. I didn't think it would be that successful, so the success definitely blew my expectations away.
At the beginning of that campaign, people were excited. They were interested to see like, hey, you know, can we actually go out and do this? Can we raise $1 million or $2 million? And I think at the end, people were just ecstatic with the idea that we were going to have what was at that time going to be the biggest Kickstarter ever.
Adam, I think, pressed it live And like within seconds, it feels like we got $50,000, and then we quickly got to our goal, and then we quickly got to $1 million. It was elating. I mean, it was like, I'm not saying it's like not my wedding day or when my kids were born, anything like that, but it was this moment, definitely this key moment in my life where, wow, like we've been in this period of time at the studio knowing we can make great stuff, but not having the ability to do it, and literally pressing that button and doing this work. Now let's just go do something that we know we're gonna make amazing and that people are gonna love.
As I said before, I'm an optimistic person, and I knew that there was pent-up demand for like an Infinity Engine style game. People were always kind of reaching out to us and saying like, hey, like Icewind Dale 2 and Planescape Torment were the last games we played like this. Like we want some of this stuff. And when are you guys gonna make BG3, or when are you guys gonna make Icewind Dale 3 or whatnot, right? So I knew that there was demand out there. I had no idea that 100,000 people would come out and say, I'm going to give you a bunch of money in advance, and I don't know if you'll ever deliver something. And that was absolutely touching to me.
Yeah, I was actually at a party, a birthday party, and Fergus called me and he's like, you got to come into the office right now. I was like, oh gosh. This was on the Saturday, so I think it was like maybe 24 hours since we launched, and we hit $1 million. And I think Fergus, wanted to make sure that we were, had the message of hitting $1 million and making sure that we had a plan moving forward on how we were going to run the campaign. He brought Josh and myself in, and we had a pretty lengthy discussion about the plans. We definitely had plans in place, but you never know what's going to happen. And so like a lot of those times, plans just get thrown out immediately because I planned for a certain amount of success, but not that success. And so we had to definitely rearrange the schedule and push things and get things done a lot faster than we initially expected. Because with a Kickstarter, you want to have a really engaging campaign with a lot of cool information over time to engage your backers, and you also want to bring new people in. And you have that cadence planned out, but with that initial success, we needed to make all that stuff, we needed to have something out on Monday that and so that was something that we had to work on over the weekend.
For the last day of the campaign for Pillars of Eternity, we gathered everybody together. We streamed it on Twitch, kind of before Twitch was even a big thing. We might have been, and I don't know, but we might have been one of their most watched Twitch streams of all time at that point. And we just recorded us, and initially it was a few people, and then it was more people and more people and more people. And I don't even know how many people were actually around there at the last, maybe 40, 50 people. And we just sat there watching the money come in. It was amazing actually how much money we made in that last day. And again, it was like a party. I mean, it was like, it was a party we were having, and not just with us, but with people online. It was so amazing to see all these people rooting, for us.
Kickstarter itself was pretty new thing at the time, and I know, everybody was getting excited, seeing some of the numbers projects were pulling in, and I never expected us to get that much out of it.
No, we did not expect the Kickstarter to do what it did. I think a lot of us had projected that it would barely make it within the last few days of the campaign. I think also because morale was so low at the company at that point, to be honest, because of the layoffs and everything, we weren't really the most optimistic group of people. But no, we had no idea that it was going to take off the way that it did.
After the elation of the Kickstarter and hitting 3.9 million and 77,000 backers, I did really want to hit 4 million on that number, but I'll take the over 3.9 million. You then have to oh, that's amazing, but we actually need to go make a game. And I think that was something where it was great that we were the studio that got that support from people, because we knew what we needed to do. Right, we knew how to make those games. We knew what engine we were going to use. We'd already been throwing some stuff together. We had the original screenshot that we had put together, and so there were some growing pains, but it really was pretty much get to work right away.
We're committed to this. We have to make sure that these people that gave us money without anything, just a pitch, that we were making something that was something that they wanted, and that was a lot of pressure. I was still pretty confident that we could deliver something that was meeting those expectations because, one, I had the experience now working at Obsidian. At that time, it was 8, 9 years. I'm not sure, something like that. 8 years, 9 years, maybe less. It was also an opportunity for myself to prove to myself that I could do this. And I think that I took that on. I took on that challenge to figure it out. I had a lot of experience playing the Infinity Engine games. I knew that we had a great team at the studio that was very passionate about that project and wanted to do it.
It was really wild to go back to that style of game because again, we had spent so long thinking that, well, certainly publishers weren't going to pay us to make that type of game. So I didn't even think about that type of gameplay. I hadn't thought about how we might want to improve interfaces, rendering, character customization, anything like that, because it just seemed like a format of game that we weren't going to get an opportunity to make again. So it was really cool to be able to come back to it after such a big gap, after so many strides in technology. We had some really great minds at the studio who, Jay Fong being one of the primary ones, who really had this great idea about how to do rendering tech to do an isometric rendered 2D environment with 3D elements that worked out really, really well. And it was so cool to see the classic style of game, the first type of game that I had worked on Icewind Dale, to come back to that and see something that was sort of like a polished and hopefully improved version of that.
I definitely feel some nostalgia for them now. I think I prefer turn-based to the real-time with pause. So something about that style of gameplay was always just a little bit hectic for me. But I've found now that when I look at something with that isometric view and, kind of these very detailed environments and, your whole party on the screen, I get warm fuzzies now. So I started as a narrative designer. So we're partway through production at the time that I joined. I remember certain parts of Defiance Bay were coming together. We would end up returning to Deerford. We hadn't really done much in Twin Elms yet, but I just started writing dialogue and characters for some quests that I was assigned to.
We get South Park done. Now we're getting Pillars done, and we got Pillars done about a year-ish after South Park, and it came out and again to an incredible reception. For a while, we actually were at a 90 Metacritic, and a few months later, press came in and brought it down to 89. But I'm not bitter. But it was great to see for quite a while that we had a 90 Metacritic.
We were at 90 for a while, and to get a 90 Metacritic score, it's like I'm done. That's hard to do. It's hard to do. I think that was a pretty amazing moment for us to be able to not only ship our own thing, our own game, our own universe, and to be able to do it both with commercial and critical success. That was a huge moment for us. And I knew it was just going to be the beginning, that now we had something that we could build off of and continue to build and continue to grow.
I knew that we had made a good game. I believed that we had made a game that was pretty faithful to the source material while being informed by my own taste, the taste of the people that had worked on it. But yeah, it was really nice and satisfying and a little bit surprising, just the extent to which people enjoyed it. I do believe that nostalgia did play a huge factor in it, but I'll take it. So people have been waiting a long time to see a game like that again, and I'm glad we were able to give it to them.
We usually do this a few weeks before we launch. We will talk to each other and write down what we think the game is going to meta at. I want to say I put it down as a 75. It might have been a 78. It was somewhere in that range. I was I think it's a 75 to 78 game. That's what I would give it. And I think that's what will come up on Metacritic. And I almost universally give about 10 points less than it ends up getting. Without a doubt, that's almost always what ends up happening. And everybody was around that. It was everywhere from the mid 70s to mid 80s. It was somewhere in that range, but a lot of them netted out around 80-ish or so. That's what we thought it was going to get. When we first put the game out in the first few days, and it was Metacritic at 90, I remember we were just stunned. We were just like, holy shit, dude, we have lightning in a bottle here. Like, people really, really love this. They really dig this. It was wild because that's the best reviewed game we've ever had at Obsidian. It was done, here's a crazy thing, right? Like, we love all of the games that we work on, or at least I do. I love every game I work on, but I'll tell you, I've never had a game as passionate I was never as passionate about a game as I was about Pillars of Eternity. It felt like my game. You know what I mean by that? It was like, I put more into that game than I think I put into any other game ever, because it felt like ours. It was like the first time I felt like Obsidian had something that was ours.